tonight to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia. We're so pleased to have all of you here and everybody who will be watching this show later online. Thank you for joining us. I'm Beth Hessel, the Executive Director. Oh, she even spelled it right, thank you. Of the Athenaeum. We are a community that believes that we are stronger as a society when we come together to share that which we are interested in, be it art or history or literature, love stories, things that matter for our community. And so we love to gather together for learning and conversation. So I thank you all for joining us. If this is your first time here, I hope that you will come back again, that you'll consider becoming a member of our community and joining us for more. It's a thrill tonight to have you all here and to have special guests, including Rachel, who is interpreting, and her intern James, who is also in the art audience, who are here from Outreach to help make our program more accessible to everyone tonight. So thank you for being with us. We hope it's the start of a longer partnership. And they are here tonight to help interpret for our special guest, Blair, who is the author of A Sign for Hope. And we're excited to learn more about this story and his work. Blair comes to us from Jackson Heights, New York, where he is a writer. He has done television work for Queer as Folk and the Emmy Award-winning California Connected. He's written dozens of plays, including the award-winning plays Naked Will, The Tragic and Horrible Life of the Singing Nun, and the Downtown Cult miniseries Burning Habits. His personal essays have appeared places like Huffington Post, Out, Daily News, and more, and he's also a two-time winner of the prestigious Doris Lipman Prize in Creative Writing from the City College of New York, including for the draft of A Sign for Home. So we are so thrilled to have you here. And Blair, I want to welcome you to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia. Please join me in welcoming.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. And I hate when I'm interpreting that, like, the commenter will talk to the interpreter during the interpretation, but I just want to say you're doing a kick-ass job, so thank you so much. This book, just to kind of give you a little background of this book, I kind of kept my life as an interpreter and a writer very separate for many years. I'm going to try not to sign while I'm talking, which is really hard. Whenever I talk about the deaf or sign language or interpreting, I tend to sign, but I'm going to put my hands in my pockets for a minute. And so I kept them separate. In fact, when I was as a writer, I used to never tell people I was an interpreter. And I mean, I would tell people I was a writer as an interpreter, but I kind of kept those worlds separate for a really long time. And then, I just decided when I was switching from writing for TV and plays to writing fiction, which I didn't think I could do, write a book, it seemed too insane for me. I'm like, I have all these years as an ASL interpreter. I started interpreting exactly when I started writing. That what about this experience I had as an interpreter and what I've learned through the 30 years or whatever I've been signing and interpreting that could be put into a book, a novel. The story in the book is invented. I can't write about my clients because that would be unethical. But the situations in the book, the experiences of the interpreter as far as negotiating between the hearing world and the deaf world and the deaf-blind world, they happen. These are realistic things that do happen in the work that I've done, but they're not, these aren't specifically true stories. Some of it is memoir of my own, like my own personal story, but not necessarily that. It's a love story, it's a friendship story. Basically, the story is about a young deaf-blind Jehovah's Witness, straight, just to add that because that's important, and his gay agnostic interpreter, who he meets one summer when he takes this writing class. His regular interpreter is a Jehovah's Witness as well. Her name's Molly Clinch. And what they start learning through this summer, the interpreter Cyril Brewster and his client Arlo, who's the deaf-blind young man, is that his family has been lying to him, you know, for a really huge portion of his life, especially about this girl that he was in love with that he thought he had lost forever. And through the story, his interpreter Cyril and he go on this quest to find out what really happened to this girl. And that's kind of the story. The story is also about deaf-blindness. It's about interpreting. It's about the friendship that interpreters develop with their clients, consumers, their students, the people that they work with. Which, if you work for a very long time with someone who's, your client as an interpreter, you can become close to them. But then that can also present ethical issues, which the book also investigates. That's kind of like the good intro to this story. I'm going to just do a little reading from fairly like the first third of the book. And also just to let you know, the book is told from two different points of view. The interpreters, which is done in the first person past tense, that means like I was there, I did that. And from Arlo, the deaf-blind young man's point of view, which is the second person present tense, meaning you. So you are looking at the computer screen and expanding the letters. And just to give you a little bit about how Arlo communicates with Cyril. So Arlo has something called Usher syndrome, which is the people I work with who are deaf-blind, it's primarily what they have. And what it means is he was born deaf. Arlo's version of Usher syndrome was born deaf as a really small boy. He had night blindness, like just a little bit darker in this room, and he wouldn't be able to see anything. And then bit by bit, he loses his peripheral vision until, for him, it's like about a spot like this. And then there's other things that happen with Usher syndrome, such as light flares going into your eyes, and other things, and he becomes blind. To communicate with someone who has deaf blindness as an interpreter in this version, and the book later talks about some newer ways of communicating with the deaf-blind that are kind of at this moment kind of developing, called protactile. But that's not how Cyril and Arlo start communicating. They start communicating by, when someone's signing, they're doing this. The person that's the deaf-blind person will put their hands on the other person's hands and feel the sign. And so that's how they communicate. It's called tactile sign language. So, and for example, just say if someone's doing a D, they will have to do that to D, see what letter it is, because there's an F, there's a D, there's an E, there's an A, and so they have to feel those letters. So that's important to this scene I'm about to read, because the scene takes place in the middle of the night, so Arlo is totally blind. This is a flashback. Most of the book takes place in this 3-month period when Arlo's 23 years old. But this is a flashback to when he's 17 years old at this boarding school for the deaf that he was sent to, where his life actually opened up. Because before he went to this school, he lived at home with parents that didn't sign, which is a big problem in the deaf world. The vast majority of hearing parents with deaf children don't sign. So they have no language until they go to school, and that causes language deprivation and is not a good thing, emotionally, but also as far as language acquisition. So this scene is when he's 17 years old, and until this point, there's this stranger that's kind of coming into his room at night, staring at him, and then running away. And it's been happening for months. He thinks it's a ghost, because his friend Martin told him these ghost stories, and he believes this is a ghost child that was a child that died at the boarding school a long time ago and haunts all the deaf kids. And so that's the setup for this. 3 years later, sorry, 1 second. I have to get my reading glasses, because these aren't my reading glasses. I'm having a stroke. 1 second. No, I'm good. Sorry about that. No, I need to clean them. 3 years later, as you lay in your bed, Martin's old story still gave you goosebumps, even though you were so much older. You ran your hand across the tiny raised follicles on your skin like it was flesh braille. Was that a message from a ghost? Was the mysterious trickster with a sweet-smelling breath who kept sneaking into your room, standing over your body, Angry John? You pulled the covers and pillow over your face. If Angry John was going to kill you, there was no point in making it easy for him. After 2 nights of no nightly visitor, you figured Angry John, or whatever ghost child it was, had decided to haunt someone else. Finally, you could sleep in peace. But then, the very next night, you felt those same small feet walk across the floor. You felt the sweet breath, the face coming closer. You felt the warmth of skin, and then, for the first time, the ghost's small fingers pressed themselves into your cheek. That does it. You yanked off the blankets and grabbed for the ghost child. But again, the small assailant was too fast, and you felt his feet scamper across the floor again. Wait, do ghosts have feet? You jumped out of your bed. The cold tiled floor stung your bare feet. Sensing whoever it was had headed for Martin's bed, you stumbled across the room. Martin's body still slept undisturbed, but then you felt something coming from the floor under Martin's bed. Hot breath was blowing on your toes. You kicked your foot under the bed, and the ghost child scurried out between your legs, across the floor, and then jumped into your bed. That was it. You were furious. Murderous ghost or not, you ran back to your bed and leapt, pressing your whole weight upon the wriggling culprit. The body was slight and half your size, solid and so warm it was clearly made of flesh and bone. You straddled the squirming small frame, trapping it tightly between your knees. I know you play with me, you signed furiously into the darkness. I know you're not Angry John. Who? Why are you in my bed? You grabbed for the imposter ghost child's thrashing hands, hoping they would speak to you. But instead, they yanked the pillow over their face. You felt the warm, small body wiggle between your legs. Suddenly, you found yourself growing stiff in your pajamas. Embarrassed at your body's reaction, you lifted your crotch off the wiggling small body so as not to accidentally commit a red star sin. Whoever it was, they were definitely not any kind of threat. They weren't even seriously trying to escape anymore. Was this all a game? Don't sneak around, you signed after removing the pillow from their face. You want to play? You must sign tactile with me. Now tell me who. When they didn't answer, you reached down to explore their face, which had very soft skin and small features. Then you felt the mound of long hair on their head, the narrow neck, the width of your forearm, their skinny shoulder which you stroked, letting them know you were no longer angry. It wasn't until you touched their chest that you noticed something truly peculiar. It was a thin body, but like Martin's, it had breasts. Sorry, you signed after leaping to the other side of the bed. I didn't know you, girl. Very sorry. Your hands reached out, and this time the small hands entered yours. They were the most beautiful hands you ever felt. She slowly stroked the 2 letters on the inside of your palm, H-I. Hi, you signed back. Name? But she didn't answer. Instead, she pulled your palm to her face and sniffed your skin, then stroked the inside of your arm gently with her fingers. Your mother had stroked your arms before you went to sleep at night, but the ghost child girl's touch was a different kind of warm, a different kind of good. Why you come here? Again, you reached out your hand hoping for words, but the ghost child girl tickled the inside of your palms with nonsense signs as if her hands were trying to approximate tactile sign language. You not blind, you asked? You just deaf? You wanted to feel more of her hands, even though you knew it was a sin to be alone with a girl, especially now that you were a young man. Brother Birch said the only girls you were allowed to be alone with were your mama and Molly. If you're with other girls, you needed to have someone else with you, but you wanted to feel the girl's hands again. You rationalized with yourself, if she really were a ghost, then you wouldn't be committing a sin, or at least none you knew about. The girl's hands reached for you, but this time they continued up to your chest and along your neck, and suddenly they were stroking your face. She pulled your head into her neck, and you breathed in the smell of her thicket of hair, burning leaves and jasmine flowers. You let your hands run along her arms, and again across her t-shirt to the softness of her chest. Your sinful penis pressed hard against the cotton of your pajamas. So you grabbed the pillow and shoved it between your bodies for protection. She stroked the back of your neck. You felt her heart rattling like a drum against her hand. You leaned back again so you could feel her eyelids, feel the marble-like roundness beneath and the thick paintbrush-like eyelashes. Her face lifted and came closer to yours, and you smelled the breath, spicy sweet, turmeric, and coriander. You faintly remembered a similar scent from years before. That first day when you arrived at school, was it the same girl? How many times had she been around you? Please tell me who. Then the girl did something no one had ever done before. She placed her mouth on yours, breathed in your breath, and let the wetness of her mouth drain into yours. Suddenly there was a feeling of such joy fluttering around your heart, and at the same time you felt an overwhelming sense of melancholy at the thought that the kiss would end. It was the most beautiful pain you had ever felt. My name, Arlo. Name sign? The ghost child pressed her perfect fingers into your palms. I know your name. Then she signed your name sign like she had always known it. Before you could ask her name, she kissed you again. That time it was even deeper and hungrier. You pressed your body against hers. There was a desperation to your hands and lips. Suddenly, she was a locked room and you needed to enter. Your hands wandered to the sinful places of her body, but she pushed you away and leapt off the bed. What's wrong? You signed into the darkness. I'm sorry. Come back, please. A second later, you felt the vibration of her small feet run out of the room. A soul sickness overwhelmed you. You felt sadder than you had ever felt, but not because you had committed a terrible sin, because you could still taste the ghost child's lips on your mouth and understood there was no guarantee you would ever meet her again. End of chapter. Thank you. Thank you. It's always just a note. Interpreting frozen text is really, really hard. It's one thing hearing people don't know is, especially like when people are just doing speech and they're reading the speech like this and there's no affect in their voice and they're just going that, almost impossible. Because they'll tend to read faster, but there's meaning in the tones we have and the words that we say. And when you're reading a script, it's just, for me, I don't know about the interpreter here, but for me, it's really, really hard to interpret because they're not thinking, they're not giving meaning to words, they're just reading sounds. So I find that particularly difficult. So I hope I wasn't terrible for our interpreter here. Again, I'm doing that thing I hate when people speak and do. Anyway, just want to know if there are any questions.
Have I ever heard that voice of you? How did you do that?
What voice?
Well, the voice, like you, third person, second person.
Oh, second person.
Right. So it's like the narrator is saying what the boy did, telling the boy what he did.
It's the reader, speaking to the reader. So the reader is the you. And the point of why I use the you, and this is what you mean, the you part is, as a writer, I wanted to bring the reader into the world of the DeafBlind, because it's such a different and complex way of interfacing with the world, which is one of the main reasons I chose the second person present tense, was that you, the reader, are Arlo. You are meeting this girl for the first time. And the other reason I chose the second person was that Arlo comes from a lot of trauma and abuse from his family, and also just the mourning someone goes through when they have Usher syndrome, because it's not like they lose all their sight at once. They're constantly losing their sight. So there's this sense of trauma and mourning they have every time they have to relearn how to interface with the world with a new set of vision, which could go on until their 50s or 60s and keep changing. So that disassociation he's feeling is the other reason I use that voice, the you. Does that answer the question? Not sure. And the place it's used very rarely. Bright Lights, Big City was a book that used the second person. That was a book from the 80s that was very popular and used it for a very different reason, I think, though.
So I found that the characters are really, really well developed. As a writer, did you kind of have a story of each of the characters fully fleshed out, whereas now you can write a new story about their lives versus, this was Arlo's story, but I found each one fascinating enough where I thought, okay, I could see you going further with this character now. I can see you going further with the guy in Seattle. Was that your intent, or was that something that you kind of set up for yourself to be able to do that in the future?
That's so interesting. That's a great question. And thank you. I'm glad you feel that way. Because that's just how I write. I always have to have like full lives for all the characters. However, to be honest, how I wrote this, I kind of wrote it with whatever was happening in my life when I started. Again, I didn't know I could write a novel. And what happened was I was working with a woman who was an ex-Jehovah's Witness. One thing I talk about in the book is interpreters in New York were gay, were kind of granola, smart feminists, were codas, children of deaf adults, and were Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's the mix of interpreters in New York. On the West Coast, I believe it's like Jehovah's Witnesses are replaced with Mormons. So that's kind of, it's like religions that proselytize tend to learn languages really well. So it's a weird mix of that. But I was working with this ex-JW who has an amazing story of her own, which I won't share right now, but ask me later. It's an incredible story. And so that was information coming in. I'm starting to build this world. I didn't know who Arlo was at first. I just, as a writer, there's called like pantsers and planners. I'm definitely a pantser. I mean, I'll make an outline which laughs at me like within the first 2 chapters. It's like, you thought you wanted to write that story? Just sit down and follow us. And that's what happened here. So like going along, writing this story, I wrote like 800 pages. I wrote enough for 2 books, which I had to like just like cut. Like the young Arlo's life from 13 to 17 was about 400 pages that I mostly cut and just, subsumed into this one. But then just as I was going on, whatever was happening in my life, so I had this ex-JW who was telling me stories of her youth there. I was raised fundamentalist myself, Lutheran and then like other Christian things, which didn't have a great effect on me. And so, but the Jehovah's Witnesses in New York, and I think everywhere, they don't necessarily want their kids to associate with other children. They don't want them to go to college. They limit what they can read and what they experience in order for them to get, be part of, salvation at the end, get to heaven. And it just kind of paralleled this world that he was living in with parents that didn't want him to associate with other children, that didn't know how to sign. As I was talking, I think I already mentioned, like, I had conversations before this, but the fact that like something like 88, 89% of parents with deaf children don't learn sign language. Yes, exactly. Someone just did this expression, exactly. I wrote this for a thesis, for my MFA thesis for creative writing, and one of the students in the class was, when they find out that Arlo's mother didn't know sign language, they're like, well, she should be put in jail. It's like, it might even be more than 89% of parents with deaf children don't learn sign language. One of the main reasons is doctors, when the baby's born, say, don't learn sign language or they won't learn how to read lips. And it's devastating, emotionally, spiritually, linguistically devastating to the children. It causes language deprivation, which Arlo struggles with as far as his like English writing skills, which you see in when I work with the deaf community a lot. There's brilliant deaf writers and brilliant deaf-blind writers. One I'd like to mention, because he has a book of poetry coming out, and a book of essays next year, is John Lee Clark, who is one of my informants for the book, who's this brilliant writer who's deaf-blind, has Usher syndrome, and I really encourage you all to like look for his work because he's great. But anyway, yeah, I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? No, so I built them as they came, like certain characters. Cyril is, 40, 50% me, except for he's tall and has red hair. But like a lot of his like backstory is a little bit my backstory. A lot of his desire to rage against the hearing world is certainly my desire when I'm working in between those worlds of the hearing and the deaf or deaf-blind. And the book goes into that a lot. You'll have nurses that will be like, oh, you don't need to interpret, I'm writing to them. I'm like, do you know if they read? And like the client will be like, But the nurse just assumes that because there's closed captions on TV, they assume all deaf people can read really well, or all deaf people read lips, which is crazy. But it's not crazy, it's just like this assumption, all these assumptions, because there's this barrier of language that hearing people don't know that. And part of the reason I wrote this book is I wanted to, for the hearing world, to kind of like explain what it is to be an interpreter between these two worlds, so they can understand a little bit better about how to interface with the deaf and deaf-blind communities and how to work with interpreters. Like, don't talk to them while they're working, right? Anyway. But yeah, so bit by bit I found out who the characters were, and then their lives just came to me. And like with Cyril and like that like kind of hot guy he meets at the conference. Oh, one thing I want to just talk about a bit. Later in the book, I get into this thing called protactile, which is a really cool thing. It's developing now and has been developing in the deaf-blind world. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna sign. It's like feedback. It's feedback. And it's a language that they're developing. It like borrows from the ASL, but then they're making more their own. Like, this is no, the sign for no, and they're like, that doesn't make sense in this space out here because their space is a tactile space. So no is now this, like, rub it off, no. Or the fact that you never stop touching your interlocutor. You are always, the person you're talking to, you never stop touching them. Cyril and Arlo signs, when Cyril signs, Arlo feels a sign. In protactile, even the hearing sighted person would never stop touching them. You always, and when I talk to John Lee Clark in person, he insists everyone signs with him in the protactile way. So it's like, it's right here, and so it's like, oh, I have to depend on touch myself because I can't see down here. And they will also use the other person's body in the sign. So this is the sign for tree falling. So maybe what they would do is, wait, come here a second, Sean. So maybe what they would do is like, they're assigning to you, they're explaining to you, they take your arm, they make it a tree, they climb up the tree, they cut the tree down. You can sit down now. So they'll like use the other person's body in the language of protactile, which is so cool, and it's straight out of the deaf-blind community in Seattle. So that's a really cool thing that I talk about later in the book there. Yes, please.
I'm gonna go to my question. It's hard enough to be deaf, just to live in the world, but then you also may be blind, and then
Yeah,
One person.
I'm not sure maybe should I repeat the question for the camera, or it doesn't matter? Oh, so the question was just like, why did I give Arlo, like, not only deaf, he's blind, and he's Jehovah's Witness. That's just, I think, something to the style of my writing. Even when I was writing plays, there would never be, like a vampire. There would be a bisexual, lapsed Catholic Buddhist vampire in recovery, which is actually a character from one of my early plays. And everyone, it's just, people are so many things, and they're not just their disability, they're not just their ability, they're not just their sexuality. There's all these other things that are part of them. And again, as I wrote it, it was just like I was working with an ex-Jehovah's Witness and also just trying to explore who this person was. So that just kind of became part of him. And then, again, he was the hardest character for me to see. Even though he's like the main character in the book, it took a good like halfway through the book till I realized who he was. And then he just kept talking. As I said, the characters just guide me to where they are. But like Cyril himself, he's gay, he's a redhead, he has psoriasis. They all have like, I didn't really get that into the psoriasis in the final draft, but psoriasis was a thing for him for a while. Yeah, and everyone has like multiple things that they're dealing with, because we all do. Yeah, but it's also like, what was really important for me is also to have a character who's dealing with religion and sexuality, which for me as a gay man growing up not far from here in Bucks County, very closeted, very fearful, called the F word, growing up. It was like really important, like what do you do when you're living in a religious world and you're having a sexual awakening? Straight people go through that too, especially Jehovah's Witnesses. One of my other informants is this amazing man named Manny. Jake Garcia is his name, and he was a Jehovah's Witness. And when he was 16 years old, he'd be sent to people's houses that had gay kids, even though he's straight, and he'd have to tell them, you're going to hell, you need to stop doing this, you're bad, this is Satan. And he told me a story where, like, the last time he did that, he was like, I can't be a Jehovah's Witness anymore. And it changed him, who was like, a straight young man telling that story. And that just resonated with me, like that struggle people have that are, or just want to be sexual, just a straight person that wants to be sexual, and they're told that that's dirty. But also for people with disabilities, it's so much of what's written is like, oh, they're little holy people that are like sexless, and I'm like, no. Sex is part of all of us, and it needs to be part of these characters too. Because it's just like one of the things that we all have inside of us that we work towards or against. Yeah, so that's why I have the multiple things in all my characters. Questions?
Well, plus it would give you more beats, right? You get more verses. If you got more problems and more issues, then you have more conflict available to you as a writer.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. I think having multiple issues does give me more to work with. I'm not sure. I think I do it more just because I don't want to lean on like a one issue thing. And there is something, and you're right, there is something like when you put multiple issues, it just like creates, not issues, because like DeafBlindness isn't an issue. It's like a way of being. Being gay isn't an issue. It's just a way of being. But like having them, it just makes for a more interesting buffet of a life, because we really are all multiple things. We want to believe we're all just one thing, and that's how we see each other. And that was the other thing going on during this. This was all during a very dark period, I felt, politically for me in the world, which was where I'm seeing all these people I went to school with as evil. They're looking at me as evil, and because we don't know all the other details of each other. And I mean, that's a simplistic thing. I also think some of the things my friends, let's just call it what it is. During the Trump years, which was really painful for me because I'm a broke, bleeding-hearted liberal and sane. Sorry. Sorry about that. But it was really painful for me. This was a lot about that. This was a lot about where Brother Birch, his guardian, is keeping the truth from him. And that's what was happening to, whichever way you want to look at our electorate, is the truth was being kept from them or changed for them in order to provide a different purpose. One thing I had to do in the book was like try not to make the evil characters just blatantly evil. So for Brother Birch, who's keeping the truth from Arlo, like my mind was, he wants to get him to heaven. He wants to do this good thing, which is to get Arlo to heaven. But it's just very, the results are not good. Yeah, so that was like a big challenge, is like trying not to make the evil characters just evil. That Brother Birch loves Arlo, and he wants to help him. But unfortunately, by doing that, he's doing a lot of destruction. And you wanted to say something?
Yes, and then I totally forgot my question. I was listening to your answer.
Other questions? Yes?
Do you ever worry in writing for a character who's so different from yourself? Do you ever worry about characterizing their experience as someone who maybe hasn't gone through that yourself?
Yeah, that's a very good question, which is like kind of taking on the mask of someone who's disabled. Yeah, this is what I think. I'm going to give two parts to this answer. As an artist, I think one has the right to write, paint, make films of anything they want, but we also have to be willing to face the criticism for it and feedback. I think if one does their research and does it well, I think we should be able to write about everything. I don't only want to write about middle-aged gay men who are short. I'm short. You may not be able to tell that out there in YouTube land. And I don't think an artist should be limited that way. I think we live in a time where academics are telling us, artists, that we can't create. You can criticize us for appropriating things and all of that, but we have the right to do it, but we have to face the feedback of it. Myself, I would say with this book, hopefully when you read the book, it's very much written from someone who has 30 years experience working in the community. One of the narrators is a middle-aged gay interpreter, and it's also seeing things that pretty much no one else would see, including deaf and deaf-blind people, because it's from this point of view of, oh my God, the hearing person saying this, the deaf person saying this. There's this one chapter where, as you know, as someone who's studying to become a sign language interpreter, you know, you have that thing where the deaf person is saying, oh yeah, I really respect her, and they use the sign for fat or something like that, and you're like, that's not what they want to say, and you're like figuring out in your mind, they're really saying, you know, formidable presence, and that you're strong, but they're using a sign that could be voiced as fat. What we have to do as interpreters to do the cultural mediation between the two. And that's something pretty much, I think, no one other than an interpreter could actually write about well. And so I think this is a story that I wanted to write. And I'm like definitely willing to accept any criticism for that. So far there hasn't been any. It's been all pretty good feedback I've gotten as far as the representation in there. Yeah, but that's a great question. Thank you. Yes, please.
So this was your first novel, and you talked a little bit about writing it. How do you think you were helped by your career writing for TV and plays, and how was it very different from writing for those genres?
That's a great question. How was writing a novel different than writing the plays and the TV and the speeches and all that other stuff I did? It was very different because, I mean, to be honest, I'm in love with writing novels now. It's, as a playwright, there's this thing called actors and directors that can either make your play so much better than it is, but 70% of the time, not so much. Even the great actors will have an off night. And as a writer-director, it was so painful for me. And so like now I can control the world, but I was like so worried as I was writing, like, I think I'm just writing stage directions. Like all through it, I was just like so worried that I was just writing, like just expanding the stage directions. It felt great though. I mean, it felt great when it was sold. Because I mean, the whole time I'm like, I don't think I can write a novel. I don't know anything about writing a novel. What happened also in the writing of this is before I got to the second person, what happened was I was about a third of the way through the book and I gave up. I'm like, this is too hard. One, I'm a hearing person writing about a deaf-blind experience, and I was just like, oh, this is too hard. I don't know if I'm representing Arlo right, and I quit. And I actually wrote a whole other novel that I forgot about until recently. Like taking a lot of the research I did, and I wrote a genre piece with kind of certain themes like this. And then I was taking this class in my MFA. I wrote this for my MFA thesis, and this terrible teacher I had gave this exercise to, it was a nonfiction class, is to rewrite part of our essay in one of the essays we read. And it was in the second person, and it was the essay was about a friend of mine, one of the inspirations for this, who's deaf-blind, and he was having me help him with his dating profile on a dating app, which is impossible for him to see the interface of that. You know, he, like Arlo, has Usher syndrome with about that much vision. He has to expand the size of the words, switch the colors, and he can't even see where the messages were. So we wrote the profile together, I took some pictures of him, and then he has me still, this is years now, I would periodically go in and have this form message he put together which says, please contact me via my phone or email, because I'm rarely on this site. He doesn't tell them he's deafblind. And then he can blow up the messages from them and reverse the colors. And I've lost my train of thought again. I just got into the details of that. What was the question? Someone help me out here. What was the question?
Challenges or differences of writing novels.
Oh yeah, so that, anyway, so I quit, I rewrote that essay for that, and then it was like, the you person, the second person present tense was like, that's it. Then I went back into it and finished it, but I didn't think it would sell. I had no idea, but then it won an award in the draft form. It won the Doris Lippman Prize. I'm like, oh, people think I can write a little bit novels. And then during COVID, in May of 2020, like a month before I graduated with my MFA, I asked a friend, could you show this to someone who might know, they can tell me it's a piece of crap and I can just drop it and move on to something else. And he gave it to his agent, who I didn't know was a really amazing agent, Doug Stewart, who was Cloud Atlas and Silver Lining Playbook, and he called me a week and a half later and said, can we talk? And then he sold it 2 months later. So that was like, oh, I can write novels. And that's the difference. It's just like, if I knew I could do this 30 years ago, I would have been doing it. But you're afraid to do these things that you try to do. For me, a novelist was like the utmost of writers, and I'm like, that's not for me. I'm going to do it like write plays, and then actors can help me make it good. And so yeah, it is different, but I mean, it also helped me writing dialogue. Well, I was an actor first, way back, and that helped me write plays. And writing dialogue really helps you write novels, because dialogue can be hard, but it's not really hard for me. So all of that, everything I've done helped me, obviously being an interpreter, helped me write this. And I just suddenly got really I'm speaking too fast. And if I am, I'm really sorry to whoever might be interpreting this at this moment. Anyway, how are we doing? Any more questions? Good? Awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I always say it's a holiday somewhere, somebody's birthday somewhere, Memorial Day is coming around, and somehow we have not started this tradition of giving your favorite people in your lives books for Memorial Day. But shouldn't that be something we do? So, in the back, we have Head House Books is here selling copies of the book. You can buy not just one for yourself, but think of other people you know who would enjoy the book. Get them a copy. Blair's going to be back there signing copies for you and to ask any questions you might have been too shy to ask while you're on camera. I understand that feeling. And we invite you to come back for more programs. After next Friday, the Athenaeum is closing the building for 4.5 months for some major renovations. Among other things, we only have 2 electrical outlets in our reading room. And we're going to fix that by creating enough places with outlets where you you can sit and write your book. If you want to have a place that's inspiring to come and write a book, come to programs, whatever. During that time, we will be having online virtual programs. We invite you to attend those. We also will be doing some tours and visits of other special collection libraries in the area, and Winterthur, and the Work to Ride program in Fairmount Park, and some other fun trips. We hope you'll join us for those. We're so glad you came tonight, and I'm going to escort Blair. I'll be his bodyguard to get him down, and if you want to talk with him, meet him down there at the table. And if you brought a book, he'll sign it for you. If you want to buy some, that's wonderful. And thank you all for coming tonight. And thank you to Rachel for wonderful interpreting.